Before launching the panel discussion on redefining equity for the Houston Innovation Summit, we decided to take a poll of the participants to see what kind of funding they had pursued or acquired.
The question on the poll really says, what types of funding, fundraising have you pursued for your business venture? And then we have several options there, and just select which options you have pursued, and you can select more than one. So I've just opened that up. If you guys can see that on your screen, you can go ahead and cast your vote. Grace, when you want me to just stop it and I'll pull what the results were. But for now, again, thank you all for joining. I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Grace Rodriguez, our CEO and Executive Director, to kick off today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Let's go ahead and see what the results of the poll are.
So our results are that the 88% of folks that voted selected friends and family. And the second options after that were crowdfunding or grants. And the last votes were credit card or pitch competition.
Okay. So interesting. Nobody's gone after angels or VC, it's interesting to me because from the tech and startup side, a lot of times people are pushed towards, you need to pitch to a VC, a venture capitalist, you need to find angels, and it's very different. The reality, I guess, is very different for diverse entrepreneurs. So with that, I'm recording this right now, and I want to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Redefining Equity session. I wanted to let you know, first of all, I am Grace Rodriguez, Executive Director of Impact Hub Houston. And Impact Hub Houston is a locally rooted, globally connected 501c3 nonprofit incubator that supports, inspires, connects, and empowers people who are working to solve some of our communities and some of the world's most pressing issues, especially those that affect historically disadvantaged communities. We work alongside about 100 impact hubs around the world in supporting entrepreneurial solutions that align with any of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the areas that we're really passionate about is making sure that we're building an inclusive and equitable ecosystem, which is why I'm really excited to be and honored to host this panel today. We have Kiley Summers, the founder of SpendDebt, Phillip Yates, the founder of Equilibrity, and Tiffany Williams, founder of Twice Media Productions, and all three of them are co-founders of Diversity Fund Houston. Before we launch into having them introduce themselves to you a little bit and tell you more about the startups that they founded, I wanted to read to you a little bit of information from the Kauffman Foundation. It reports that while business ownership may be a promising path to generational wealth creation for Black entrepreneurs, they found that Black entrepreneurs are almost 3 times as likely as whites to have their profitability hurt by lack of access to capital, and more than twice as likely to be negatively impacted by the cost of capital. So the question we want to address today and in the future, right, as we're developing solutions to these problems, is how can we ensure that opportunity and support for Black entrepreneurs' financial equity is equitable itself? And with that, Kiley, can you please share with us your story and how you launched SpendDebt to address these types of issues?
Absolutely. One, thank you, Grace, and thank you to the Impact Hub team for allowing me to be here and us to share our story. But for those that don't know me, my name is Kiley Summers, and I am the founder of SpendDebt. And SpendDebt is a financial technology company designed to assist people to pay off debt, leveraging micropayments through everyday transactions. We like to say that you can spend and save with most banks, or you can spend and invest with other financial technology tools, but we are a tool that allow you to spend and pay off debt at the same time. And our mission is to help save 1 million families from financial fatalities every time they swipe the debit card or have a banking transaction. In the discussion today, redefining equity, as I think about, how we got started, it was all really about financial education and financial awareness of my own situation. Coming from humble beginnings, I got the chance to witness, the lack of financial education growing up in my home. My mom did the best she could, but it wasn't there. And then I experienced it as a young adult. And shortly after graduating from college, I got the engineering job. I'm doing well, but I was repeating patterns that, that I experienced growing up. And if I would have continued down that path, I thought to myself, life would be very difficult. Life would be very hard. So my wife and I together, we had over $100,000 of consumer debt. We began to focus in on eliminating that debt. We didn't have necessarily, hey, we want to pay this debt to be here, but we wanted to pay the debt just to relieve that burden. And so in that process, we learned so much about obviously becoming debt free and understanding the value of a dollar. And ultimately we became debt free. And after we became debt free, it was an aha moment. But the aha moment came in sharing our story with friends and family, people who we knew were suffering from consumer debt, but they were still shopping, still entertaining, they were still doing all those things. And we thought to ourselves, well, how do we help them? How can we help them? And so God put this idea of Spend That in my head, and that's really how Spend That was birthed. But the lesson in it all, and I hope that you guys take away from the story, is that whether you become debt free or you control your debt and not let it control you, it unlocks opportunity. And as we think about equity, to me, I think equity is ownership, right? And not being a slave to the things that we have that don't return value or don't have a return on investment, i.e., having a closet full of shoes and clothes, right? That was me when we was going through this process. I'm spending $500, going shopping for what? That those things didn't return value back. And it was some hard lesson. That's a part of that, becoming debt free or growing up in humble beginnings and learning, understanding what money is and the value of it and really how to leverage it. So redefining equity, as we talk, I want, from my perspective, I think about ownership, and we can go more into it, but that's my story. And I would love for you guys to follow Spend That and use it, allow us to help you progress. If you have opportunities and you're trying to achieve a financial healthy life. So I'll stop there, Grace. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Kiley. It's also really important for us to elevate the stories of Black entrepreneurs too, because if people can see it, they can be it, right? And it's important to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs and leaders with stories like yours. So Phillip, can you share a little bit about why you founded Equilibrity too, if we're thinking about return on value and how people can invest in things that do return on value too?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And Grace, Michelle, amazing job. Just on behalf of the Impact Hub Houston team, I'm glad to be a part of it and love to see the work that's being done in the community, specifically even dealing with diversity and inclusion, which, the Impact Hub Houston team has really got in front of and really led this charge. And so thank you for this platform. With my Equilibrity platform, it's along the same lines of just what Kiley said. You have somebody like Kiley, who I met in 2015 or 2016, and then Tiffany roughly around the same time. And they have similar stories in terms of what they were able to do when given the right amount of resources and then put into an environment to succeed. And both of them are doing very well. Coming from A-Leaf, Houston, Texas, which is the southwest part of Houston. Robert, I know you're on here, Southwest. I take pride in the environment that I grew up in. Now, I won't be the one on this call to say that I grew up without anything. I had loving parents, all right? And there was a time when it was just me, my mom, and my brother and sister, but I still had a loving mom and I still had a dad I can call up. But everybody I grew up with didn't have that same opportunity. And knowing that you get to see up close with people who don't have community to support them, what happens. And so a majority of the people I played basketball with, a majority of the people I grew up with from elementary, middle school to high school didn't get the same opportunities. Even though I don't feel like I'm even deserving of some of those opportunities, I said, how did I get here? And it was all based on community. And so over time, I spent over 10 years now at the Houston Area Urban League, and in my capacity, whether as an employee at one point in time, a part-time employee, and now even a consultant where I support them in the Entrepreneurship Center. You still see the same theme in terms of what could happen if you give them resources. So like you said, Grace, if they see it, they can believe it. But it's a little bit more than that. And so I wanted to take a step further. It was something I started studying shortly after grad school, a concept that was introduced to me by my cousin, just talking about binary economics. And it's just the ability to be able to increase the amount of production and lessen the amount of consumption. And so I want to localize that in certain communities. So we're talking about going into communities that have a median income of $18,000 to maybe $28,000, and then introducing them with the same concept. We're going to provide them a clear pathway using entrepreneurship as intervention to overcome a lot of the barriers that we see plague not only African Americans, but people of color and minorities and people who have gone through a financial transition in this country where, we're based on capitalistic markets. So it's a zero-sum game. Somebody's going to lose, but that doesn't mean everybody who wants, if you want an opportunity, you should get a chance. And that's what Equilibria is going to do through technology and gamification, is give them the opportunity to overcome those barriers using entrepreneurship as intervention. And what we hope to do is localize those resources for Black-owned businesses and other minority businesses that have access to mentors, access to other resources and capital, and using our proprietary technology to give them not a different credit score. We're not trying to replace the credit score, but supplement their credit score so they can get access to capital. So through the work with, that you guys are doing and here in Houston, and obviously being on the Diversity Fund Houston team, I'm hoping that Equilibria can help just a lot of those people get into the system, then push them along, and working with Impact Hub, Urban League, Twice Media, Spend Debt, and everybody else is on this call. We're hoping that we can collaborate and really make it a more just and equitable environment here.
All right, thank you so much, Phillip. I think what you're talking about with developing this ecosystem also to support Black entrepreneurs is also really critical. And I know that, Tiffany, that's also one of the things that you've been working on. You have so many different clients with Twice Media Productions. Can you talk more about that as well?
Absolutely. So good morning, everyone. And thank you, Grace and Michelle and the Impact Hub team for having us on here. So I started Twice Media Productions shortly after finishing graduate school. I lost my dad suddenly and decided that life was too short and I just wanted to go after something on my own. And I was studying journalism at the time because I wanted to amplify Black stories. And while that's still very important to me, I felt like entrepreneurship was the route that I needed to go to make change in my community, because as I progressed, I could create jobs, I could give back on a larger scale, and I could do things that I might not be able to do with the current route that I was on at that time. So at the age of 24, with no business or job experience, I packed my bags, I moved to Houston, and I opened up my company. And I did leverage programs like the Houston Area Urban League Small Business University, where Phil mentioned that he and I met. And that's where I also met Kiley. And the three of us together decided that we needed to do something, because we saw the entrepreneurs coming through that program that were just as qualified, were, had great ideas, had great work ethic. They just did not have the access to capital. And the other piece of that was we saw that they didn't always have the confidence that me or someone like a Kiley had, who also went through that program. So we collectively decided that it was time to do something about it. And that is where Diversity Fund Houston came about.
And thank you for sharing how Diversity Fund Houston was launched, because really it's interesting to see how people who are closest to the problems usually come up with the best solutions for them, because you know what the challenges are and so on. So I want to make sure that we bring everybody back to the spotlight. Let's see if I can, there you go. So my first question for all of you is alluding to one of the things that Kiley said earlier about redefining equity. How do you define equity, right? There's this idea of ownership, but then also being equitable. Can you say like what you see some of the challenges might be in the current definition and how we can improve upon that?
Yeah, I'll start. I think just to further expound on the idea of ownership, I think we need to be more producers than we are consumers. And I think to become a producer, I think it's a level of things that we should have in place or be working on. Right, one is the education or developing intellectual property, and it could be through experiences, right, in which when we live and work, or the personal finance. Personal finance is huge, because if we don't have it under control, we may not be able to take those risks to become that producer or to become an entrepreneur. And then the whole notion of home ownership, versus renting, right? But these things have hurdles within themselves that prevent some communities from acquiring and attaining some of these thought processes. And then retirement, right? Think about investing in your retirement, right? I mean, in your last days of college, they always tell you when you start your career, on day one, put into your retirement. Don't wait to year 10 to start putting into it because of compound interest, right? Using some of those techniques, I think helps us essentially gain the personal side of equity in the things that we live with and we experience on a day-to-day basis. And I think when you develop the mindset from a household perspective, that lends itself to other tentacles to become ownership, right? To have ownership, or to be able to lend itself to give you the room to develop those ideas and take those risks. And that's where entrepreneurship come in and really, put together a company or ideas or products that can help, lift, whether it's your family or other families, out of their situation. And at least that was my case, right? And we knew that, we were free and clear of our financial struggles. How do we help other people? Yes, we'll make money along the way, but we would be able to free somebody up by using our platform. And I can say today we've gotten some great stories back. And so for me, defining that equity is really about being a producer versus a consumer and developing solutions to help other people achieve the same.
Thank you for sharing your story, your personal story, Kiley. Phillip, Tiffany, do you have more to add to that?
Yeah, I'll speak from my standpoint. I talked about Lewis Kelso's theory of binary economics, which I encourage everybody just to kind of review it whenever you have your leisure, your own leisure. And he really talks about that whole increase in production. But what I like from an economist standpoint, he's not trying to do it from at somebody else's peril. Like, you don't have to go ask for social benefits, or you don't have to increase the taxes of another person in order to achieve those goals. It's more or less, like Kiley said, changing the mindset, but more importantly, it's making sure that people can go inside their own homes or their own communities and then have all the resources they need to be successful. And then that's the challenges that we all have here on this call and as leaders in this space, is that, okay, if you're redefining equity is making sure that everybody has access to the right amount of resources. And if we all are honest with each other, it's not just capital, it's other things that people need to be successful. The second part of that, in my opinion, is something we can't answer. Like, we have to allow people in those situations to define what equity is. We have to let them define what capital is. I was in another workshop and I heard somebody tell a story where there was this gentleman, he had inherited a lot from his grandmother, and his parents were no longer there. He was living in their home. And it was in one of those communities I was speaking about earlier, where the median average income is $18,000, $28,000. And all her belongings he looked at as trash. And so he gave it all to a pawn shop. And then the pawn shop took it over, or one of those resale shops. He was walking down the neighborhood one day, and then he saw that somebody went and purchased one of his grandma's quilts, added to another boutique shop, and was selling it for like 300x. And it's because they put another price tag on that blanket. And that's what happens a lot of times in our community, is that we don't even define our own capital, our own value. And I think that when you're redefining equity, is really redefining the mindset that you have something to offer, that you are the value, that you are, as Tiffany will say, you are the ones we've been waiting for, President Obama. And so I think that's a part of the challenge, is how do we now change the mindset that what I have to contribute is just as valuable? So with the work we do at the Urban League or other communities, a lot of times I had to struggle with that when people came through the program, and those people who were looked as the superstars, then other programs would come and extract them from the community and say, you need to come over to this room, and then they'll put them on, they'll showcase them, and then we would lose that person. And then they would add this value, like, oh, I went over here and it's so great. And then I love the fact when I got to talk to somebody like Kiley, who's been around in the circuit, because Kiley will say, you know what, Phillip, everything that you guys are doing at the Urban League is the same as they're doing over here. The only difference is X, Y, Z. And I think that's something that we have to start doing with our communities if we're going to redefine it. Is you have something value, won't you value it, do something with it. I'm not saying don't collaborate, I'm not saying don't work together, but you shouldn't have to leave your home in order to feel like you're appreciated or valued in this society.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is that it's not on us solely. Of course, it requires dismantling the systems that have been put in place that are designed to keep people of color out, particularly Black and Brown. So as we work together and have people with levels of influence that are working to make sure that we are dismantling these systems, then I feel like we can begin to move forward. But yeah, Kiley and Phil are both right. We do need to understand the value. And that's what I spoke about of how we started DFH, was invoking that confidence in these entrepreneurs to know that you are just as qualified and your ideas are valid and you have every right to be in whatever room you step into. So I think it takes both sides. It takes those that hold those levels of influence to make sure that those systems that have been put in place are broken down and that the playing field is in fact level. But it also takes us understanding our value and making sure that we take ownership of not only that, but other things that Kiley mentioned, like the home ownership and the businesses and all of that. But it's going to take both sides to make all of that happen.
Yeah, definitely all sides, actually. There's not just two sides, right? There's so many different aspects to this. And thank you for making that point, because I feel like one of the most important things that we need to consider about dismantling systems that keep these issues in place is really allyship. And how can we help other people be better allies to people of color, and especially with Black and Brown communities, seeing everything that's happened this past year. So for people who are watching this who don't know how they can be better allies, who say that they aren't racist, but might not understand some of the things that they support that are helping keep institutionalized racism in place, what are some of the challenges that Black entrepreneurs or Black and Brown entrepreneurs face regularly that they can help dismantle, that they can help build better moving forward? And I don't know if Tiffany, if you want to start with that this time, since you brought it up, or if you want to go back in the same round robin order.
No, I can start. So yeah, I think it means those people that hold those levels of influence, those allies, if you are in fact an ally, call it out when you see it. When you see something that's not right or that's unfair, call it out. Make your voice be heard and understand that you hold a level of influence. And so within that organization, you can tell people when something is not right. You can make sure that everyone is getting those fair opportunities. So I think it means using your voice, using your position of power and making sure that everybody has equal opportunity. And I would say definitely starting there is something that people that want to be allies can do. And also educating yourself. And don't just look to the first person of color you see to start asking them a bunch of questions. Google is very real and you can start educating yourself. Now, if you need further clarification, that's fine. I'm happy to answer some of those questions for you, but don't come to me with stuff that I feel like you can take the time to learn on your own. There's a lot of our history has been kept out of the history books. I understand that, but it's available. It's out there. And if you do, in fact, want to learn, then you need to educate yourself. And you also need to call it out when you see it. But you aren't going to know how to call it out per se if you don't see it yourself. So I think it definitely starts with that education first.
Kiley, do you want to go next?
He was preaching. That's it. Sister Tiff. No, I mean, she's absolutely right. It just brings me back to, I'm looking at everything through my lens, right? Really from, my experience as an entrepreneur. And it's been some tough lessons and some hardships when it comes to having conversation with investors or startup, development organizations or the executive directors of some of these organizations. I'll be frank. Last year I was in an accelerator, and I have pitched, spent that I don't know how many times, and we're fortunate enough that it has won us so much money. And the executive director of an accelerator told me, right, that I sounded like a old used car salesman and a preacher. So just think about that. Obviously, she didn't look like me. She wasn't, she didn't come from the same background I come from. But these are the things that are being exhibited out of her mouth in front of my peers, in front of mentors and advocates of the program. Instantly, I had a feeling, right? And later we had a conversation about that. But to Tiff's point, one, we have to be educated because some things should never come out a leader's mouth, right? And if she didn't know, don't say that, because how is that helpful to me as a founder? How is that helpful for me, pitching? It wasn't constructive at all. And when we approached her, she didn't have much to say about what she said, because I felt like it was a personal attack, and that was a cultural reference from my perspective, right? And those things right there need to be broken down, need to be dismantled. And sometimes leaders perpetuate these things. And again, we got to continue to call them out. And I just agree with Tiff. And I just wanted to share that story because it's happening. And lucky enough for me that I had a little bit of experience. I had enough confidence to keep going, but that could have killed somebody's dream. That could have killed somebody's opportunity to then get back up in front of the next crowd to present. Right. And so it's definitely important to call it out and to help, everyone be educated. And I like the word you use, allyship, because it's totally needed if we're going to really, gain equity from all sides.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is, I think Kiley's speaking to cultural competencies very well. And I think if you're going to do this type of work, or even wear the hat that you're doing this type of work, you have to understand what you don't know what you don't know. And that's even people who are Black, or who are brown, or who are women, or who are, that have a title of being a minority, because you don't know what somebody else is going through. Similar to the sentiments that Kiley shared, I've shared this space for over 10 years now, and nobody's different. Nobody's the same. And so it's important that if you're going to do it, that you should, one, go to their community and allow them to tell you what's needed. A lot of times when people come up with different initiatives, they use data, or they use some kind of, they use information that hasn't been validated to come up with these initiatives. And that's why we're continuing to go through this same cycle. I like what also Ms. Evans just said, in terms of if you're going to come up with an initiative that's going to talk about financial inclusion, you have to have a sense of reality. And so you have to identify those barriers that somebody may have a felonious background, or they may have some kind of tainted history. They may not have a vehicle. They may have a baby. They may be struggling to pay their bills. And all these are harsh realities, but that shouldn't stop you from achieving your dream or your true purpose. But if you're going to come up with an initiative, you're claiming to be a partner or an ally, then anything you draw up needs to tear down some of those barriers. And that's the only thing I would add to what Tiffany and Kiley stated.
Exactly. I think the one thing I would add to it, it stems back from this panel that I was on at the Houston Black Leadership Forum. And it was a panel on the Houston's tech innovation ecosystem. And all of the panelists were white except for me. And I made a challenge at that point to say, at the end of this panel, it's great to say what you're doing. You want to be more inclusive. You want to have more diversity. But what are you doing? And so I challenged each one of them to find an organization at that event to partner with and see how you can help that organization elevate the members of their community, whether it was the Black Lawyers Association or the Black Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if any of those organizations took me up on that challenge. I know that we did too, but it's also up to us, right? As Tiffany was saying earlier, it's not just on the Black community to solve these problems. It's up to us who are allies or would like to be allies to the Black community. I can't call myself an ally, but I hope my actions speak for myself. Is that how do we make sure that we're elevating other people? Early on, I was a co-founder of Station Houston, and I remember when Kiley came to Station at one point, I was talking to him about how can we develop an alternate innovation corridor that's more like an impact corridor, but that supports the communities in the 5th and 2nd and 3rd wards that were being neglected, kind of, or being overlooked because there's so much talent and great ideas coming from these communities that were being overlooked. And he was telling me, but the thing is, we shouldn't need a grace. And it was awesome. Like, it's so funny because people would think that that's kind of an insult, but to me, it's like, it's so true that we should have, people like Tiffany and Kiley and Phillips. We should have multiples of them that are also included in these decision-making groups whenever the Greater Houston Partnership gets together or the Innovation Corridor stakeholders get together, who are helping create the decisions and influence the strategies that are going to also direct where funding goes, right? To how do we support all of these different types of efforts that are coming from other communities. I would love for each of you to also share, like, more specifically, so that people can get a very clear idea of what are some of these challenges that are not getting funding, or what are some of these initiatives that should be getting funding that you are seeing coming from the Black community. Kiley, you're smiling. I don't know if you want to start first or.
I mean, today I'm wearing the hat of the entrepreneur. I'm gonna be an advocate of entrepreneurs because we see ideas all day long. I've been across a lot of different spaces in Houston, external to Houston, and they're just not getting funded. And these some of the best entrepreneurs, in my opinion, some of the best entrepreneurs right here in the city, but they get overlooked. For example, Melanoid Exchange. For those who are familiar with Melanoid Exchange, they're on fire, and they've been a Div Inc. and Generator, G Beta, and a lot of different places. But they just recently won Afrotech, and those familiar with Afrotech is the largest African American tech conference on the globe that I know of. And they won first place, right? But trying to raise capital, they get exposure and they make it into some of the best rooms to compete and get some of the best talent across the country. But it's been difficult to get traction, get footing, to get funding right here in this city. I don't understand, right? And so when we think about equity, it's like, what do we need to do to get to the start line for investors to invest or write the check? And Melanoid Exchange is just one of many examples that that have come through Houston. Some people have left Houston to go raise capital. My lens today is really from the eyes of the entrepreneur. It's a lot of great founders, a lot of great companies, right? So if you have your, hey, I don't invest in a company, I invest in a founder. We have that. We have great companies, and so what do we need to do, or what is that? What is the start line for the entrepreneurs to get the check, right? And I think Tiff probably would echo this. That's why DFH exists, because we want to be the friends and family around, of helping entrepreneurs, because it's difficult. If we can't get to, the first round of capital just to get the idea to a, MVP stage, how will we ever be able to create equity within our communities and to be able to flourish and have thriving communities? It will always continue to be the rat race. And so that's the charge. And Grace is, how do the people who control the wallets or the checkbooks invest and meet the entrepreneurs where they are in the raw state, take down the cultural differences, pattern matching, right? I have a bias. I don't like the term pattern matching. I get it. I understand it. But pattern matching to me is, if I don't come from Harvard, I don't come from Stanford, if I don't have all of the bells and whistles on my resume, then that means I'm not qualified to get the check, right? I don't meet, the bell curve of the entrepreneurs that you invested in. But does that really identify if I'm going to be successful or not? No, that doesn't say that. And if we know that we already identified entrepreneurs or people of color, Black and brown founders, they have opportunities with those things, and we already saying that they don't exist. We're exiting them out the equation, so they'll never be able to get the opportunities. And so that's the last thing I say is meet the entrepreneurs where they are, rethink what pattern matching is, and I wouldn't say take risks, but really find a way to help entrepreneurs in the raw state. I'll stop there.
Tiffany or Phillip? Yeah, go ahead.
I like those redefine those patterns. I think what people, and to summarize it, when I think Kiley's saying is parity, right? That's what we're looking for. And I'll speak from my hat in terms of somebody who's, for those who don't know me, I'm a lawyer. That's my trade. That's how I feed little Phillip and Harper at home and keep Mama Bear happy, right? But everything else I do is passion. And like, this is what drives me, whether it's because of my upbringing, whether it's because of the grace of God, or just because of, I'm just a civic trying to do something right. And at the very beginning, Michelle and Grace took a survey, and it showed that 88% of the people on here look to friends and family for funding. And so going back to the stats or data that I pulled even for Equilibrium that we all have access to, if you look at some of the predominantly Black or African-American or even Hispanic communities, you'll look at their median average of income being $18,000 to probably $30,000. So that just tells you do not have access to a friends and family to get access to capital. So the issue is not what kind of ideas, in my opinion, but how can we get enough businesses in the pipeline that can achieve parity? Because if you talk to the other side, which I remember Tiffany and I going to talk to a former leader here in the SDO market, and he said, oh no, it's hard for everybody to get access to capital. And he said it with a straight face, and Tiffany and I just kind of grunted our teeth as if there is no issue with Black and brown businesses getting access to capital. But I felt what he was saying is that it's the density issue. And so we have to increase the level of density of businesses that are being started up in our community. And that's the reason why I love the work that Justin Robinson, Eric Goody, and the board of directors of the Houston Urban League, they're doing. I love what Impact Hub Houston's doing and a lot of the other SDOs. And I love the work that Diversity Fund Houston, what we're going to do in terms of giving them that opportunity, because 88%, that's a high number for a reality that doesn't exist in our community. If you're telling me that's the viable option. And so that's what I think we need to concentrate more on, is like making sure everybody has the access to resources, because every idea is not good. And just because we have some unicorns, our unicorns may not be valuable in the market. But if we can increase that density level, I'm almost positive that now either one will be the ones making decisions. So that's what DFH is. We want to be the check writers and allow us to make the decisions because, again, like you said, Grace, we're solving our own problem. But I also think that those other gatekeepers who have the purse, or they're the check writers, they'll then start paying us more attention because they're not just looking at the ones that are off or the outliers as the only ones they have to look at just to meet some kind of goal or good faith initiative.
Yeah, and I mean, the guys said it all. The issues specifically are access, getting in those networks, and then not having friends and family with the kind of money that it's going to take to fund an idea. And so I think, we can't allow those that hold levels of influence to say that they can't find Black leaders or they can't find Black entrepreneurs or any person of color. Like, we're out there. Kiley gave you one example of many. There's so many, and I mean, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, like everybody in this space knows that. So I think it's just making sure that we amplify organizations like Impact Hub and Diversity Fund Houston, that we're having these conversations, but that we're amplifying these conversations so that everybody has to listen to what we're saying. And we're working together and collaborating so that we can provide these opportunities, because right now we're being shut out of them. And so it's going to take our allies, it's going to take us, at the point that we've all made already, it's just going to take us working together and everybody putting their foot forward to make sure that we're going in the same direction.
Thank you. I want to go more into Diversity Fund Houston in a second, but first I want to bring up something that came up in our prep call. And Kiley was talking about how we have to help entrepreneurs be more efficient with resources so that they can stretch their runway. And it turned into, why do we always have to do more with less? Why do entrepreneurs of color always have to do more with less? And Kiley, would you want to start with, first the pragmatic piece, right? Helping people understand how to be more efficient with resources, but then also for all of you, how do we start to include justice as one of our KPIs? So Kiley, go ahead.
Yeah. This stemmed from some of the conversations stemmed from a call that I was on. I spoke at the St. Louis Startup Week last week, and it was this whole notion around we can't change like what a return on investment is to an investor, right? That end of the equation is that everybody put money in, wants money out, right? So that's set, right? But early in upstream, right? When we think about where the start line is for entrepreneurs, we can redefine that, right? And that's the conversation we were having. So when we think about the question that you just mentioned, Grace, in terms of how do we do more with less, or why do we always have to do more with less? I don't know if I can answer that question, right? I think we just do what we have to do so we can get that opportunity, so we can get equity, and so we can get to the place where, hey, we're at the start line, right? But this whole thing, or a word or phrase of capital efficiency. I'm not sure if you guys heard this term, but capital efficiency, the formal definition is the ratio between the dollars expenses incurred by a company and dollars that are spent to make the product or service. So essentially, how are you using the resources of the capital that you have to get to that first MVP or get to that product in the marketplace where you can acquire a customer? And I totally had it all wrong. I made a lot of mistakes as a founder, but I would challenge all founders to think about it in a few ways. Is one, build your team, right? I talked about the personal finances, so I'm not going to say that no more. But build the people that you're working with. Build a team, think about the network you have and leverage those things. But more importantly, when you're doing that, is connect the opportunity to get a customer before you start to build. That's how you can extend that runway and be more capital efficient. So, sometimes we build it and we think they're going to come, or we think the customer is going to come. That's not always the case. And so, the further you can get to touching the customer and get them to agree with the product you're building, that's how you can increase the capacity of the capital that you have, because we know that we have a short runway before we get that, that first investment, friends and family round, we get to that crowdfunding. We have to extend our runway. And to do that is just really thinking outside of building that product. And because building a product, it sometimes can be capital intensive. And so I think about it from that perspective, Grace. And then the other side of justice, man, that's it's freedom from biases, or freedom, right? From a justice perspective, right? And that's just continue to tear down these systematic races, institutions, communities, right? And we need support to do it. We need allyship to do that, right? Because we're not in those institutions, we're not in those communities to really have a true impact, right? We'll continue to do the work that we're doing, right? To amplify it, to make it, and try to, partner with these folks so we can help educate them. But we need the other side, all sides, as you said, to help penetrate and call those things out. I think that's how we gain, more capacity, and we increase capital efficiency amongst the founders, and we give them the runway they need to make those mistakes. And it's just a convoluted problem, and we got to control what we can control and call on help for the other things and other aspects that we can't control.
Yeah, so I think in terms of changing the ROI, we have to apply pressure to the ones that currently hold the power. If we can get them to invest in these businesses with founders of color, then we can get the data to see whether or not they can succeed. Because right now we don't have any data. Like, you can't tell me that Black businesses won't perform if you won't give them the capital they need to even prove that right or wrong. It's like, so we don't have any data to base anything on. So until those with levels of influence, and I keep calling on them, until they start to provide these opportunities, provide this capital, then there's not much we can do to change the current ROI. Like, I can't go to an investor now and say, well, no, invest in this company because it's going to give you a certain type of return, 3x, 10x, whatever, because I don't have any data to base that on. All I know is that it hasn't been done. So let us have an opportunity to prove it right or wrong. Like, give us that opportunity to fail. Give us that opportunity to exceed expectations. But without anything, we have nothing. And we're going to be right back where we are.
Yeah. And I love what Kim was saying over there in the chat. If you guys aren't reading, you just listen to what she's saying. And that's how I truly feel. I feel for two things. One, what Kiley was saying, and I think he was alluding to, was the fact you have to accept the notion or the premise that there's been social injustice, social inequities done to African Americans. Until you accept that premise, you cannot have this conversation. And we're not talking about just yesterday. We're not talking about Kiley's experience. We're not talking about Tiffany's experience. We're not talking about what Phillip may have witnessed or experienced in his short amount of time on this earth. We're talking about 400 years of oppression intentionally designed. And so when you start looking at the laws in the book, which I'm not going to go through that whole spiel, you can read Color of Law if you want to. I think it's a great book and it'll educate you. But if you just look at the zip codes, and then we look at those zip codes, we talk about the median average income of the people who currently live there, and then what's being invested into those communities right now to move them out so they no longer can afford to live there. And then you'll see the new median average income. You'll see this recycle of a problem. And so you have to, one, redirect capital, like she said. But you also have to accept that you have to blow this effing system up and change it and redo another one. And that starts with individuals so that you're not just moving them around. So that little Phillip or little Johnny, little Jamil, little Kiley, little Tiffany, Grace, whoever you want to call it, is just not being repurposed each generation where you're just resetting the clock, because that's all we're doing. We're just resetting the clock. So somebody gets far in the race and then all of a sudden they're dead, and then that family has to start all over. Or Tiffany worked so damn hard to start up her business and grow all her assets, and then somebody gets sick in her family. She has to deplete all her assets, and then we start all over. Robert does so well himself. He educates, goes to U of H, and he goes to an Ivy League school, and then he tries to help out, but then something happens and now he has to start all over. We keep setting the clock back because we're accepting the system as if it's working. It doesn't work. And so if you're going to be a part of this conversation, one, you do have to redirect the resources, but you do have to build a new system that is equitable and just for everybody. And I think that goes to your point, Grace, in terms of coming up with a new metric to actually show value in that system. And that's why I love the fact going into communities of color and working with them and not forcing them to leave their community to come work for you.
If I could add just a tad, man, Phillip on fire right there. But a couple of things I think about is, I want to go back to the notion, of what you mentioned earlier, Grace, of how can we be in the decision-making tree or sit on a decision level board or what have you, right, when these decisions are being made, because ultimately it's decisions that are being made that's impacting our community that we have no control of. Kim, in the chat, Black capital matters, right? If we're not in the position to have that influence, to educate, to get people to think differently, we're going to spiral back into the same old system. And it's so important to be included in the decision-making process at the highest level. And I think that will help shape where we ultimately want to go. But if we're not included, I think, that says a lot on when these systems are put together, on the decisions, the outcomes that, we say that we want, but the outcomes that we know that we are going to get. And I just wanted to echo that point.
Yeah, and to pull a lot of what you're saying, all three of you are saying together, the idea of investing in entrepreneurs at a rate that we invest in other, entrepreneurs. I wanted to share this story about Quibi, right? It raised about $2 billion in venture capital to fail in less than a year. And what we expect from BIPOC, from Black, Indigenous, and people of color entrepreneurs is that you have to succeed at your very first shot. And you have to succeed with maybe $10,000 or $50,000 versus $2 billion. So how do we start investing in entrepreneurs of color at the same rate so that they have the opportunity to fail and they have the opportunity to pay themselves a good wage, right? A market rate wage as a CEO of a startup company, so that if you do fail, at least your mortgage is paid for and you don't have to worry about sending your kids to school and all of these other things that people who have those opportunities don't have to worry about. I feel like sometimes people who are not of the Black and brown communities don't don't understand it as well. They think it's like, oh, you're pulling the race card, right? I hear that often from people who are hesitant or resistant to saying, well, we can't just give people money because they ask for money. Well, I mean, that's what we do with other entrepreneurs, right? With Silicon Valley entrepreneurs or young white male entrepreneurs. And it's not against, young white male entrepreneurs, but it's just that it's not equitable. And, going to what you're saying, Phillip, about parity, I want to know, as, for what you all are working on, and we're closing out on the top of the hour too, I want to make sure you get to talk about Diversity Fund Houston and how this can be a way of helping at least get it closer to a level playing field. And how can people engage with you and support you in this venture? Whoever wants to start.
Can I punt to them? I want, if Tiffany, and I'm doing this because y'all explained it very well. Tiffany, if you can explain the grid fund and how we came up with a new metric that is maybe not always measured, and then Kiley can explain the theory based on how we invest in founders. I think that will drive the point home at this last hour, if y'all don't mind.
Yeah, so the Grid Fund 1 was designed to invest in Black and Brown founders during the Friends and Family round. So we already talked about the challenges, the barriers, and the less than 2% that these entrepreneurs are getting. So what we're looking to do is to be that Friends and Family round, to give them that initial set of funding so that they can create that MVP, or they can do those first initial steps before they go in front of a traditional VC and get more money to actually scale. But I think, we're the ones, to Phil's point earlier, we're the ones we've been waiting on. So we really have to work together to build up organizations like Diversity Fund Houston so that we can give these entrepreneurs an opportunity, because they're not getting funding elsewhere. They're not given the benefit of the doubt because the ones that are making the investments, they don't meet all those marks. To Kiley's point earlier, they didn't go to Silicon Valley, they're not in Silicon Valley. They didn't go to an Ivy League school, so they're not getting that opportunity. So what we're looking to do is really just, to Kiley's point earlier as well, meet them where they are in their rawest state. So we're giving the entrepreneurs the funding that they need. And so in terms of how you can support us, it's, you can help with mentorship. You can help get the word out about what we're trying to do. If you're an entrepreneur, submit your application so we can review it and see if you're qualified to get the funding from us. But yes, or having panels like this. So Grace, you mentioned earlier, you're not an ally. You're absolutely an ally. And I think, the work you're doing in Impact Hub and others in the ecosystem, it's really just going to take all of us, to your point earlier, Grace, to come together so that we can amplify organizations like DFH and we can give the entrepreneurs an actual opportunity to succeed or fail, right? Like, we have to be able to give them something so that they can move forward.
I think we can drop the mic right there. I think, Tiff, you killed it. Only point I will make is, our Black and Brown founders are just as smart, just as scrappy, just as intelligent. You put the adjective there. They are just as, right? And so why not? Why will we not invest in them? That's the question. Why will we not invest in them, right? To go solve a problem that they are very, very familiar with. Right, and we're doing some research and some data analysis of some reports that have come back that show later down the progression after like Series A, Series B, that minorities outperform their counterparts. Right, so if later down the pipeline, if we're outperforming, right, how do we get more into the pipeline in the beginning? Right, how do we give people more opportunities to fail? To Tiff's point, right, how do we give them that runway? How do we allow them to fail and or succeed if we know the outcomes are proven out to be better than our counterparts? And we want to invest in those scrappy founders because we know in the raw state, they are genuine, they're hardworking, they're smart, they don't get it done, quite frankly. And if we can't change why we have to do more with less, we've proven that we can do more with less and we can get more accomplished. That's the reason why we should invest. And like, I just love the idea. It just gets me excited because, I've been that founder. I know what it means to be told no. I know what it means to bang my head. And in some cases, I'm still going through it, right? I'm not far removed from the process. And if I can be an advocate and being part of DFH to invest into those early stage founders and companies, that's what I want to do, because I know it will make a difference. I think I know it will make a difference.
I love it. Love it. Yeah, nothing else to add. Honestly,
Okay.
that's it. Thank you, Grace.
Sure. I will have one thing to add as a final note. To piggyback on what you all have said is it's don't invest in Black and brown entrepreneurs because it's morally good and it's ethically right. But as Kiley was saying, they're more resilient, right? Look at all the challenges that they've had to face and they still succeed, right? They're more capital efficient. They're more scrappy, as you're saying, right? So if they can overcome these challenges, imagine like anything that comes against them in the future with this pandemic, with racial equity, with all of these different things, all these different challenges that they've had to overcome over the past decades and centuries. Imagine how that can work even better for them, exponentially better for them, if we just invested in them at the same rate that we invest in other entrepreneurs. So with that, we are going to share the links to your organizations in the video follow-up and on the YouTube channel to make sure that people know how to contact you and support you. But if there's any one link to definitely go to, it's thediversityfund.com to learn more about the Diversity Fund Houston. And thank you all for participating in today's session. Thank you for joining the workshop. Please spread the word about all of these different organizations, Spend It, Twice Media Productions, Equilibrity, and Diversity Fund Houston, and help us elevate more Black and brown entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.